Imagine finding out that your wife stole all of your family's money to run away with a man she had never even met in person. This story of financial betrayal is going to show you just how far someone can go when the illusion of an impossible love becomes stronger than 25 years of marriage and a lifetime of savings. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon. Your support helps this channel grow and makes it possible for more men like us to find strength and resilience through stories like this one. My name is Martin Caldwell. I'm 55 years old and I work as a production engineer in Richmond, Virginia. After 3 decades at the same company, I was counting down the days to my retirement. Only 2 years to go. Janet and I had a stable life in our suburban neighborhood, one of those predictable middle-class routines where you know every neighbor by name. I thought I had everything under control until small amounts started disappearing from our joint account. At first it was $50 here, $100 there. Nothing that would break the budget, but just enough to set off alarms in my engineer brain. I've always been meticulous with money, tracking every penny ever since we got married 25 years ago. I even called the bank twice thinking there was a system glitch. They assured me everything was fine, but I couldn't figure out where those transfers were coming from. It was like someone was testing our account, pushing to see how far they could go without being noticed. Around that same time, Janet started acting strange. My wife, a former art teacher who was never really into technology, suddenly couldn't put her phone down. Whenever I walked into the room, she would quickly switch screens or step outside to take important calls in the backyard. She said she was helping people in need through some volunteer project, but there was something in the way she talked that just didn't add up. It felt like she was hiding a secret she couldn't share with me. What bothered me the most wasn't the mysterious calls or the money slowly disappearing. It was realizing that after 25 years together, my wife was treating me like a stranger. Janet would avoid eye contact during dinner, answer with one-word replies, and spend hours locked in the bedroom. This financial betrayal, one I didn't even fully understand yet, was changing the woman I thought I knew. Something much bigger was going on, and I had no idea just how big the bomb was that was about to go off. That Thursday night, I came home and found Janet in the kitchen with tears streaming down her face, clutching her phone like it carried devastating news. She said she had just found out that a college friend had a terminal illness and desperately needed financial help. My first instinct was to hug her, but something about the way she avoided my eyes made me hesitate. In 25 years of marriage, I had never even heard of this so-called friend. The name sounded like it had been made up on the spot, and that nervous little smile of hers confirmed my suspicion that there was a lot more behind those tears. That same night, Janet did something she had never done before. She changed the password on her phone without telling me. We always shared our passcodes out of convenience, for cards, accounts, devices. Suddenly, that phone became a safe I no longer had access to. She justified it by saying she had read about financial scams online and wanted to protect herself better. Funny how someone who barely knew how to use WhatsApp a few months ago was now so worried about hackers. That sudden change in her digital habits made me realize we were stepping into unknown territory. In the days that followed, the mysterious phone calls became routine. Janet would rush to the backyard whenever the phone rang, whispering like she was in some kind of secret negotiation. I tried asking her about those conversations, but she dodged the question or changed the subject in a heartbeat. At the dinner table, meals turned into silent sessions where I felt like a stranger in my own home. And as I watched that parallel life of hers take shape, I couldn't get out of my head those headlines about wives who betray their husbands and drain the joint account over some online affair. A fear that now felt less like sensationalism and more like a mirror of what was happening here. On Sunday morning, I woke up to the sound of frantic typing coming from the living room. I found Janet at the laptop, typing long messages with a sense of urgency I had never seen before. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of fragments on the screen before she closed everything in the blink of an eye. She said she couldn't sleep and was sorting out her friend's situation, but the tremble in her voice only made it clear that this whole story was just a cover for something much bigger. That's when it hit me. There was a financial betrayal growing inside my own house, and I was the only one who hadn't gotten the memo yet. That whole week I kept waking up in the middle of the night, tossing and turning while the clock flashed 3 a.m. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like Janet typing something I wasn't supposed to see. The silence in the house seemed to have its own weight, crushing my thoughts. I rehearsed questions I never imagined I'd have to ask the woman I'd shared half my life with. And even before I could say them out loud, I already knew the answers wouldn't be easy to hear. At work, my mind just wasn't there. The production panels I used to read like a map now looked like blurry shapes dancing on the screen. During my lunch break, I checked our bank statement 3 times, only to find small withdrawals with no clear descriptions. Every tap on that banking app felt like an alarm going off. Something was slipping right through the drain of our savings. It was like someone was dismantling my sense of control, piece by piece. Janet now had dark circles under her eyes, kept a coffee mug constantly full, and her hands trembled slightly. I tried asking what was bothering her. She stood up before I could even finish and said, "We'll talk later. I don't want to worry you." The mechanical way she looked away told me the worry was already there. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the invisible wall that started to grow between us. I felt like a guest in my own house, realizing that something big was happening outside of my presence. I thought about calling the boys, but the idea of alarming them made me swallow the words. Instead, I went down to the basement and opened boxes I hadn't touched in years. Old receipts, contracts, joint account passwords. I wanted proof before mentioning any suspicions, like someone gathering tools before opening up an unfamiliar engine. If there really was a bomb about to go off, I needed to understand the wiring before stepping in the wrong place. It was a family man's investigation, done quietly under the yellow light of old bulbs. That's when I noticed the one missing detail. Janet's grandmother's ring was gone from her finger. Being naturally observant, I noticed the bare spot where the green stone used to shine. I asked her about it, and she said she must have taken it off while watering the plants and that it would probably show up soon inside her jewelry cabinet. That excuse sounded way too improvised for something with so much sentimental value. That missing piece felt like the first concrete sign of a financial mess that still had no name. That night I sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the low hum of the freezer and my own breath getting faster. Was it just my paranoia, or did the facts really point to my wife stealing from me? The knot in my stomach told me I wasn't overreacting. That missing ring became a symbol of everything else that might be disappearing without me even noticing. I promised myself I'd dig deep until I found out who, when, and why, even if I was terrified of what I might end up discovering. Early Sunday morning, I sat at the kitchen table and opened our investment app, expecting to see our usual $420,000. But the balance showed just over $400,000. $20,000 had vanished in 12 weeks. Each $1,500 withdrawal on Fridays didn't seem like much on its own, but together they left a terrifying hole. My chest tightened as I realized that decades of savings were slipping away with no explanation. The precision of those withdrawals pointed to a calculated pattern, not impulsive spending. The transactions were disguised with generic labels, medical assistance or emergency support, all sent to the same bank in London. I checked the calendar and saw that they lined up exactly with the phone calls that sent Janet running to the backyard. The timing was way too precise to be coincidence or a banking glitch. I needed the missing piece that would connect those debits to the mysterious calls she was taking. I still didn't have undeniable proof, but the urgency to uncover the truth couldn't be clearer. That afternoon, she rushed outside to take a call in the garden, leaving the family tablet unlocked on the table. Face recognition still worked with me, a detail she had forgotten after changing all her passwords. I took a deep breath, leaned in, and the device opened without any resistance. I knew I had very little time, maybe 10 minutes, before she came back and shut everything down. Every second was gold in figuring out what was really going on behind my wife's seemingly normal routine. Right there at the top of the message list, my heart nearly stopped when I saw Brad Pitt. The actor's official photo was staring back at me, and for a split second I almost believed it. But then reality hit me. This had all the hallmarks of one of those online romance scams you always see in the news, following the same script of a celebrity in trouble. The question hammered in my head. How had a former suburban art teacher fallen for something like this? The shock hit me like a punch to the gut, making me wonder if I was dreaming or if my wife was really living out this dangerous fantasy. I started reading the first messages with my hands shaking. He talked about medical treatment in London, frozen bank accounts, an urgent need for financial help. Janet replied, calling him my prince and promising she would make any sacrifice to save him. The clash between that over-the-top Hollywood drama and the sweet smile I'd known for decades hurt physically. It felt like discovering my wife had been living a double life I never could have imagined. Every time she hesitated to send money, Brad reacted as if deeply hurt. Minutes later, he would drown her in over-the-top compliments and then ask for another transfer. I quickly recognized the manipulative cycle. Guilt, intense affection, guilt again. I started taking pictures of every key part of the conversation, realizing I was staring at a romance scam far more sophisticated than anything I'd ever heard of. I wanted to gather as much evidence as I could before time ran out, and she came back from the yard. I found an 8-second video attached to the most recent message. In it, a man who looked exactly like Brad Pitt, lying in an upscale hospital bed, spoke in a weak voice. "Janet, your last help made my treatment possible." I'll never forget this. The image was technically flawless, but there was something in his eyes that seemed off. Too static. For a few insane seconds, I almost doubted my own instincts. Still, the feeling that I was staring at an expertly crafted trap was undeniable. Then I stumbled upon the full details of the plan, and it made my blood run cold. A one-way plane ticket to London, departure date set for the following week. She mentioned selling family jewelry and planned to bring a substantial gift in cash. Our retirement savings were being systematically drained to fund a romantic meeting that probably didn't even exist. The image of Janet boarding a plane with a suitcase full of our life savings made me feel sick. A small, irrational part of me still wanted to believe it couldn't be real. But I kept thinking. There wasn't a single news story anywhere about Brad Pitt being hospitalized or broke. Who could possibly have technology advanced enough to imitate his voice, his expressions, his charisma with such eerie precision? If this wasn't genuine, we were looking at an international criminal operation on a terrifying scale. Doubts and theories bubbled uncontrollably inside my confused mind. I heard Janet's familiar footsteps coming back from the yard and shut the tablet in a desperate move. When she walked in smiling, she asked if I had been using it and if she could take it. "And your sick friend, how is she doing?" I asked casually, pretending not to know anything. I saw her eyes falter for a split second, her hand trembling as she took the device back. She mumbled something about stable but still worrying, before quickly changing the subject, making it clear that my question had hit a nerve she wasn't ready to expose. I knew I had to figure out who, or what, was really behind this Brad Pitt before this very real story of betrayal swallowed us whole. On Monday, I called the factory, said I had a family emergency and went straight to the bank after work. I showed them the statements with transfers to London, mentioned my suspicion of financial betrayal in my marriage, and asked them to trace every cent. The manager printed out records, signed a report of inconsistencies, and, visibly tense, suggested I contact federal authorities. I left with a folder full of evidence and the certainty that I would need to play in an entirely different league to stop the drain. What I didn't yet know was just how delicate the next move would be. That very afternoon, I met with Agent Grace Collins from the Bureau, who listened to my account with surgical patience. I placed on the table receipts, chat screenshots, and the list of transfers in a geometric sequence. She flipped through everything in silence, let out a short sigh, and said the patterns matched an ongoing international case. To my relief, no one tried to downplay the problem or blame the victim right away. The investigation finally had official backing, something I could never have achieved on my own. Grace explained that we were dealing with a scam involving a fake celebrity, a romance scam powered by deepfakes of famous actors. The gang used software capable of imitating voice, mannerisms, even micro-expressions, seducing vulnerable women in just days of chatting. That was the missing piece of the puzzle. Someone had turned Hollywood charisma into a weapon of digital extortion. The level of sophistication explained how Janet had fallen for the trap so easily. Previous arrests had stalled because victims had cut off the flow of money too soon, making the criminals vanish without a trace. That's why the agent proposed limiting transfers to $500 a week, low enough not to raise suspicion, but high enough to keep the channel open for tracking. The idea felt counterintuitive, but it was the only way to catch the entire network red-handed. I agreed, knowing that every dollar lost would now serve as bait for something bigger. That same night, the bank put the cap in place. 2 days later, my wife tried to send $2,000 and got an error saying the limit had been reached. Frustrated, she called customer service. The manager, following instructions, spoke of a temporary system update. I stood in the hallway, phone in hand, listening to her tense voice echoing through the house while she typed out new pleas to the fake Brad. The frustration in her voice cut me in half, but I knew it was necessary. When the scammer didn't reply right away, Janet started crying softly, unaware that I was watching the glow of her tablet reflected in the dark window. That scene hurt more than any bank statement. It was the living portrait of someone held hostage by a fantasy. I chose to keep up the act of the clueless husband, writing down times, key phrases, and emotions that could later be used as evidence. Every tear she shed turned into another piece of proof I kept with a broken heart. The following messages repeated the same cruel cycle. He acted disappointed, promised her eternal love, and then asked for more money. In that manipulative back and forth, my wife stole from me, thinking she was saving a movie hero who never existed. I photographed every screen, building a dossier that turned this real story of betrayal into a growing body of evidence. With each screenshot, I felt like I was documenting not just a crime but the slow end of our marriage. On Friday, Janet announced she would leave 2 days earlier because of an emergency surgery for her supposed friend. I offered her a ride to the airport. She smiled, thanked me, and said she'd call a cab for 4 a.m. That smile trembled like fine porcelain about to crack, a sign that she was terrified I might discover the real destination of that suitcase. In that moment, I understood that the whole house of cards was swaying. One wrong step could make it collapse completely. Saturday passed under a tense truce. She folded clothes methodically while I exchanged coded messages with Grace. Across the Atlantic, British agents were setting up a private room at Heathrow, while teams in Eastern Europe coordinated a chain of arrests. My role was simple and cruel. Pretend everything was normal until the trap snapped shut. Every hour that passed brought me closer to the moment when everything would come out into the open. At midnight on Sunday, standing in the dark hallway, I heard Janet rehearsing words of love in a voice message she would never have sent if she knew she was under watch. I promised myself to see this through without destroying her completely, even though I knew some truths had already shattered what was left of us. In just a few hours, the sun would rise with answers. Until then, silence was my strongest weapon. The operation was about to begin, and I was both a spectator and a key player in how it would end. Janet left the house before dawn, suitcase ready, saying the cab would take her straight to the international terminal. I stood at the door pretending to be supportive, but as soon as the car turned the corner, I called Agent Grace Collins. Bureau teams were already monitoring Richmond Airport. All she had to do was complete the check-in for London, and the lie about the sick friend would collapse. The plan worked exactly as expected. Minutes later, I got confirmation that my wife had been escorted to a private room for questioning. No handcuffs, just stunned confusion. Inside the sterile cubicle were copies of the bank statements, printouts of the chats, and that 8-second video. Faced with such clear evidence, she tried to deny it, but her voice broke before the second sentence. The dates on the spreadsheet lined up perfectly with each phone call that sent her running to the backyard. When she realized the connection, she broke down in silent sobs, gripping her phone like it was the last thread of belief in that digital romance. Grace called me in shortly before noon. When I entered, Janet was pale, clutching a box of tissues. I tried to listen, but every excuse hit the wall built by months of secrecy. On the table next to us, the dossier glared back at me like a mirror of drained accounts and shattered trust. She was a victim, yes, but also the person who had spent away part of our future without a single warning. The agent then revealed what was behind it all. Brad Pitt was Victor Kral, a 34-year-old Czech man, leader of a romance scam network operating in 15 countries. With pre-scripted lines, he alternated affection and guilt to keep the money flowing. The group had already collected over $2 million, all funneled through shell accounts and deepfake videos of celebrities. Hearing this made Janet tremble with shame. For me, it was the bitter confirmation that the scam was on a scale far bigger than I had imagined. Grace projected the video frame by frame, pointing out tiny flaws in lip movement and misplaced shadows that revealed the fake. Janet covered her mouth, horrified by how perfect the lie had been. Through sobs, she asked for forgiveness, promising never to hide anything again. My instinct was to comfort her, but the hurt still blocked any gesture. I stayed still, torn between empathy and resentment. After 3 hours of testimony, the agents released Janet as a witness under the condition that she would cooperate. We left the building together, but the silence between us weighed as much as the financial hole she had left behind. In the car, she held her phone as if afraid of another illusionary message. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to figure out if there was anything left to save. Every mile back home seemed to measure the emotional distance that had opened between us in just a few months. That afternoon, I told Grace that from now on, I would stay in touch only for procedural matters. I didn't have the strength to relive technical details every time the phone rang. She understood and stressed that legally, my wife was now a key witness against Kroll. I hung up thinking that justice could bring us numbers and sentences, but it could never mend the torn fabric of our marriage. When night fell, I sat with Janet in the kitchen, lit only by the lamp over the table. She told me the transfers had already passed through 4 European banks. Recovering even a cent was nearly impossible. She also confessed she had sold her grandmother's ring to reach the amount the scammer demanded. I listened in silence, feeling that every word dug the trench between us a little deeper. I told her I would handle the lawyer and the travel expenses for future testimonies, but that I needed space. I set up the guest room while she searched her purse for sleeping pills. There were no screams, no doors slamming, just the muffled sound of a marriage slowly breaking apart. In the hallway, the family portrait seemed to stare at both of us, asking for answers that neither of us could give. The next morning, I consulted a specialist about the division of assets. She booked individual therapy as recommended by the agents. The international scam had come to an end, but the crack it left behind was now etched into the walls of our home, a reminder that some scams take far more than money. As I left for work, I realized that from that moment on, every step we took would be on rebuilt ground, fragile but irreversibly different. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the airport, the house still breathed a heavy silence. I spent my mornings working from the dining room turned home office while she drank her coffee quietly in the kitchen. Every glance between us carried weight, even when we kept the conversation to the bare minimum. We avoided the master bedroom, each of us using different corners of the house as separate shelters. The only constant sound was the ticking of the clock, a reminder that, despite everything, life kept moving forward. One Friday afternoon, I suggested she look for an apartment near the art gallery where she was about to start working. She hesitated but admitted that she needed a place of her own to rebuild herself. On the agreed day, I drove her to the new address, helping carry boxes that felt like more than just objects. They held the reconstruction of a wounded identity. When we closed the elevator door, there was a restrained hug, filled with both gratitude and longing. The move wasn't just hers. It was a step for both of us to finally breathe again. When I finally sat down with Tommy and Jake, I told them the truth without assigning blame. I explained that their mother had been tricked by scammers pretending to be a celebrity, and that part of our savings had left the account without me knowing. I made it clear there was no dad's side or mom's side, just a family trying to deal with the fallout of a sophisticated scam. They seemed relieved to understand that no one had acted out of malice, but the atmosphere stayed heavy. We decided to visit her together over the weekend, as a reminder that even living in separate homes, we still belong to one another. 6 months later, we live at different addresses, but we keep respect and cordiality every time we meet. We see each other for dinners on special dates, celebrating small victories without the pressure of stepping back into old roles. She channeled her experience into helping other victims of online scams. I relearned how to value my own space and priorities. Our marriage didn't go back to what it was, but it found a new form in honesty and the freedom to start over, each of us in our own way, guided by the lesson that loving someone also means allowing them to move on. And now I'm talking directly to you who followed this whole journey. Have you ever been through something like this? Discovering digital scams inside a marriage, dealing with broken trust, or having to rebuild everything after a financial betrayal? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone going through exactly what you've already faced. If this story about digital vulnerability and real-life fresh starts touched you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week I bring you stories of people who faced emotional scams, financial losses, and managed to redirect their lives with courage. Join our community and turn tough experiences into fuel for becoming the best version of yourself.